and more people seem to be suffering from allergies today than ever before. Allergic reactions seem to be something which is almost pandemic. 50 years ago, it was only the odd person you heard about who suffered from hay fever, or maybe somebody broke out into spots after eating strawberries. But nowadays, it seems hardly anybody's free of some allergic reaction or another. What is different about life today? What's changed? Well, we're experiencing more environmental pollution than ever before. It's almost impossible to find pure water today. The air we breathe is being polluted by industrial wastes, by acid rain, and by aeroplanes flying over all the time. The soil which grows our food is being poisoned with chemicals and with crop sprays, and even the energy which radiates from Mother Earth is being affected by all the electromagnetic paraphernalia that's being used today. The radar, the radio, the TV. Who knows what effect all these things are having upon us all? And after all, the food that's grown can only be as good as in the environment which produces it. The foods are being taken by the food industry and packaged and prepared for consumption by the public. And in the process, they're using thousands of different chemicals to preserve and to color and so on. And nobody really knows what's happening. This, in a sense, is an uncontrolled experiment in human nutrition. Who knows what the long-term effect of these chemicals will be? Because nobody's ever used them long-term on people before. Well, what symptoms are people experiencing? Well, the thing that troubles us most is that the symptoms that people are suffering seem to come from the staple foods. Foods like bread, milk, cheese, tea, coffee. And how is it that the staple foods that we eat are causing all these problems? Well, it's due to stress. But when we look at a simple thing like bread, it should be our staple food. Stone ground, wholemeal, organically grown wheat, turned into nutritious bread, and yet for some people this creates a disastrous set of symptoms. The post-viral symptom of people feeling exhausted. It can intensify depression, mood swings, and in fact, who knows what all the symptoms are that wheat can produce. Coffee, for instance. A lot of people drink the occasional cup, and that might be okay. But what about drinking lots of coffee? Well, that can produce headaches, even migraines. It can produce irritability, nervous tension. And what about milk? The much vaunted milk. Are we getting enough? Well, I regret far too many people, it seems, are getting too much. And it's causing them problems with catarrh, mucus, constant infections, cold symptoms, and so on. And what about one of the worst culprits of all? Sugar. We're encouraged to eat sugar to get energy. In fact, it's true to say that if you eat too much sugar, it interferes with your ability to develop energy, and so you feel tired. And it's an astonishing fact that each man, woman, and child in this country consumes an average of 2.2 pounds or 1 kilogram of sugar every single week. The result? Sugar can weaken the immune system. Sugar can cause us to have much less resistance to stress. Sugar can actually cause the situation in the body which actually gives rise to allergies. And so we find ourselves looking at the staple foods. So why are people getting allergic reactions from staple foods? Well, as I've explained, environmental stress, social stresses, work stresses, marital relationships, interpersonal relationships, all provide the stress which undermine the body's immune system, so when we eat foods which should nourish us, we get allergic symptoms. And what's happened? As a result of this, there's been a vogue of allergy clinics, and many people are going to them for help. Unhappily, some people have been to several clinics and been told a different story at each one, and this hasn't exactly encouraged them, nor has it solved their allergies. And what methods are being used? Well, cytotoxic testing, for instance, which is supposedly quite accurate, involves using a blood sample and comparing the foods with the blood. But that's not how we absorb our food. Many people have used scratch testing. Well, again, this is an uncomfortable and sometimes almost painful procedure, and it doesn't always give the reliable results we need. And is that surprising? Because we don't absorb food or dust through our skin. So now I'm introducing to you kinesiology. Kinesiology is a new way to deal with allergies. It's new to medical science. It's a system of using muscle testing to find out how the body reacts to foods. It's a very effective, it's a very now method, and it is non-intrusive, and it requires no machinery, and it doesn't require really much expertise, as we're going to show. It was only discovered in the 60s, and so it's an absolute breakthrough in healthcare. And this tape is going to tell you how you can use muscle testing to help yourself be free of allergic reactions. I'd like to give you an example of what a muscle test looks like. We're going to be testing a muscle in the upper chest here called the pectoralis major clavicular, and that's a muscle which derives its energy on the same circuits as does the stomach, so we can use it for testing for food sensitivities, as you'll see later on. The way we test this muscle is to put the arm in this position at right angles to the shoulder, at right angles to the body, and with gentle and firm pressure we push down and away from the body in that direction. And the way we make the actual test is to ask Maeve to push up and towards me as I put on the pressure. Okay, push up. And that feels really nice and firm to me. How did it feel to you, Maeve?
Very firm indeed.
Good. So that tells us that that muscle's circuits are in good condition, and we could use that muscle to find out whether any food sensitivity affected it. This computer contains a huge amount of information. Yet, with just a few keystrokes, we can extract some information from the memory banks. In a very similar way, the electrical circuits of the body can be accessed through muscles to provide us with valuable data about food sensitivities which give rise to allergic reactions. One young lady had suffered from what is often called a post-viral syndrome for several months. I'd like to introduce you to Iris Beale and her daughter Nicole, who will tell you a little bit more about how kinesiology entered their lives. Thank you for coming along, Iris, and tell us, please, what is your professional background?
Well, I'm a trained state-registered nurse and a midwifery tutor, although I'm not practicing at the moment.
So how did you come across kinesiology?
Well, in the first instance, I heard of it some few years ago, but it seemed very complicated, and I was very put off.
So what rekindled your interest?
Well, about 18 months ago, I was on a nutritional course that used kinesiology.
And so, how did you come even more closely involved with it?
Well, I decided then to take the other courses they were offering in applied kinesiology, just the basic levels.
And what about your daughter? Because it seemed like she'd been having a really hard time.
Yes, she hadn't been well for quite a few months, and she was just sort of lethargic and had been diagnosed as a post-viral syndrome, being in a post-viral syndrome. And I was really getting quite worried about her.
And how did you feel through all this, Nicole?
I just basically felt tired and really groggy and terrible the whole time. I just felt really bloated and I just couldn't get on with my life, you know. And I didn't think it was me. I was really quite sure it was physically something was wrong.
And what about your schoolwork?
That suffered too, because I couldn't concentrate. from when I got up in the morning till lunchtime, I was just out of order. I could not work. I could not concentrate. I just couldn't sit there and listen. I wanted to fall asleep on the table. So, you know.
So what happened when you had your first treatment with kinesiology?
Oh, it was great. I mean, I'd sort of doubted it, to tell you the truth. I mean, it sounds pretty zany sort of idea. And when I first had it done, I just got off, and literally 10 minutes later, I just felt so great, and I thought, hey, you know, something has happened, something's changed, and I'm feeling a lot better already.
Wonderful. And how did you feel, Iris, when you saw your daughter get off the table?
Well, it was really almost emotional for me, because it was just amazing how she was. She got off that table, her eyes were shining, and her colour was no longer yellow, but pink, and it was just wonderful. Wonderful.
That sounds tremendous. It must have been a very exciting time for you. Subsequently, Nicole, we found that you are highly sensitive to wheat, and that was part of the thing that was causing this post-viral syndrome and destroying your energy levels. How have you managed your life since you've been avoiding wheat?
Oh, it's just been so much better. I mean, I no longer get up and feel, you know, bags down to my armpits. It's just so much better. And in a way, I don't miss the wheat because I know what it does. You know, I've mucked up a couple of times and had wheat, and I mean, within a couple of hours have felt awful. So, you know, I just think it's easy to keep off it, and so I'm fine sort of adjusting my diet to that.
Well, thank you both very much indeed.
It's a pleasure.
It's okay.
Historically, educated people do tend to resist new concepts. It hardly seems possible that Leonardo da Vinci drew sketches of the possibilities of a helicopter in the 15th century. Jules Verne wrote 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea 100 years before nuclear-fueled submarines were even dreamed of. A 4-minute mile was deemed impossible when I was a lad at school. And Sir Edmund Hillary hadn't scaled Everest, nor had we flown to the moon. In fact, we used to say there's about as much chance of that happening as someone flying to the moon. But now we've been. And wonderfully, there have been technological breakthroughs in the sphere of the body. Muscle testing enables us to sample different parts of information from the body in much the same way as we do from a computer. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Rodney Adenyyi Jones, who is a medical doctor who uses kinesiology regularly in his practice. How is muscle testing used in ordinary medical practice?
There are a number of standard muscle tests which are taught in medical school and which give considerable amounts of information about the state of neurological systems and muscular systems within the body.
For instance?
A well-known one is the pupil reflex, the shining of a light into the eye, which causes a constriction of the pupil and indicates the state of the retina, some of the nerve nuclei in the brain, and the actual function of the pupil muscle itself.
Is there another one?
Another well-known one is the knee-jerk reflex, in which the front of the knee is struck and causes the leg to swing outwards, assuming everything is normal, with the muscle in question, the nerves connecting it to the spinal cord itself, and some of the centers at the bottom of the brain.
Tell me, Doctor, how is muscle strength assessed?
There's a scale from 0 to 5 that's used to assess muscle strength. A 0-grade muscle is unable to make any sort of movement at all. It can't even contract. A grade 1 muscle is able to contract, but not to move the limb. A grade 2 muscle will move the limb in a neutral plane, but not against gravity. A grade 3 muscle will move the limb against gravity, a grade 4 against gravity and some resistance, and a grade 5 muscle will move the limb against gravity and a substantial resistance. That would be called normal.
How does what you are doing in kinesiology fit in with what you have just described?
All kinesiological muscle testing comes within the realm of grade 5 in muscle strength terms, In other words, we are looking at what are neurologically normal muscles and finding finer grades of distinction of function.
What does this mean in practical terms?
The practical benefits are that this form of muscle testing gives us access to information that is not directly related to neurological information.
How do you use this technique in your practice?
Perhaps the most important use I find for kinesiology in my practice is in the detection and assessment of food intolerances or allergies. This is far more common than one would wish, and I find I need to use kinesiology on just about every patient I see. Furthermore, in the use of complex homeopathy, kinesiology is very helpful in selecting an appropriate remedy for a patient, and equally in looking at nutritional deficiencies, of which again there are far more than one would like to see. Kinesiology forms a useful tool in tailoring a person's nutritional supplementation to their needs. The final thing is the emotional assessment, which one is able to carry out and actually carry out treatment using kinesiology.
It seems kinesiology gives you greater insight into your patients and enables you to give more effective treatments.
There's no doubt about that. When one is dealing with the sort of problem that ordinary medicine isn't good at, then kinesiology offers unparalleled assistance in getting to the bottom of problems and providing effective, really effective help for patients.
Thank you very much indeed. The body contains many computers that control our various functions, and when we do muscle testing, we're accessing information from those computers. A motor car will not run very well unless its battery is in a good state of charge. And the analogy between a motor car and a human being is quite close, because a car needs fuel, it needs air, and it needs to have an exhaust in good condition. Now, if that battery is not in a good state of charge, the car won't start, or the lights are dim. Our bodies function by means of electrical energies. As long as we replace the energy as fast as it's used up, we can stay fit and healthy. When we use up more than we can generate, then we get weakened and depleted, and we lay ourselves open to a weakened immune system and to allergic reactions. We can't see this electrical energy. And just because we can't see it doesn't mean to say that it doesn't exist. I'd like to show you this object here, which is a magnet. And although there is no observable energy coming out of it, it is in fact a very powerful magnet, giving off some very powerful forces. And what I'd like to do is to demonstrate those forces. And the way we can do that is we can take a tray which has got iron filings on it, which have been put at random onto it, and then when I put the magnet underneath it, you can see that the iron filings change shape and move around according to where the magnet is placed. And if I take the magnet away, then all the filings drop to the bottom of the tray. So once again, we see the effect of the invisible. And when we're muscle testing, we're reading things which are not seen. Using muscle tests, we can find which circuits have been affected by foods. But before we do that, we have to be sure that we're making an accurate muscle test. Because after all, if the test we're making isn't accurate, then the results won't be clear. So I'm going to show you now how we set about checking to see whether a muscle is functioning well. You may want to pause your tape at various intervals as I show this sequence, and you can try it for yourselves and then come back and compare it with what we're doing here. Well, Stephanie, what I'd like to do is test the pectoralis major clavicular muscle. This is a muscle up here in the upper part of the chest, which is related to stomach function. Now here's our starting function position, which we saw before with Maeve, and Stephanie has her thumb pointing towards the floor. Now I'm going to apply pressure with just 2 fingers to the inside of Stephanie's wrist in this direction, as if to push it down that way. And the first and most important factor of muscle testing is to test pushing slowly. So I'm going to press slowly, and I'm going to take the pressure off slowly. Each time I do this, I'm going to emphasize a different point. The second point I'd like to make is that I'm pressing gently, slowly and gently. There's no need to press hard, and there's no need to tire the muscle. It's not a trial of strength. You'll also notice I'm only testing briefly. 1,000, 2,000. It takes about a second to say the word 1,000. So I'm just pressing while I say 1,000, 2,000 and off. And the last thing that's important when you're muscle testing is that we both keep breathing. Because if we stop breathing, we'll get a false result. So here goes the last time. We're pressing slowly, gently, briefly, and we're both breathing and off. How did that feel, Stephanie, when I was testing that muscle then?
My arm felt very strong and steady, and it was very easy for me to meet your pressure.
Okay, great. Now we've established that we have a strong muscle, we can see whether that muscle circuit is affected by testing it against a certain food. Now, food in different positions affects the body in different ways. The most potent position is under the tongue, right here. But for most purposes, we find that testing foods between the lips is perfectly adequate. So I'm going to ask Stephanie to put a piece of bread between her lips. That's right. Good. And with her bread in that position, I'm going to ask her to hold back again as I press slowly, gently, briefly, and we're both going to keep breathing. So hold up now, Stephanie, please. And there's the pressure, and I'm taking it off again. And I'd like to ask you, how did that feel, Stephanie, when I pressed on your arm?
It felt okay. It felt like I had to work a little bit harder though to meet your pressure.
Okay, but there wasn't a real dramatic change.
There wasn't a real dramatic change, no.
Fine. Now, that's a standard test against a strong muscle. Now, if we want to increase the sensitivity of this test, we can do two different things, and I'm going to move on in two steps now to show you two different tests you might like to make. The first one is I'm going to put two fingers just underneath Stephanie's ear in this soft place, just where I'm demonstrating. And if I then test Stephanie's muscle at the same time without the bread, that tells me that this is a clear circuit, and now she's going to put the bread back in her mouth. And what we're testing now for is to see whether if a large quantity of that food would cause a systemic overload. Now in this case it didn't. So we know that this particular substance wouldn't just cause a problem if it were eaten in quantity. Now then, the third test I'm going to make is I'm going to ask Stephanie to hold her head in such a position that I can put two fingers just where her ear joins her head at the front there and remake the test. So bring your head back round again, Stephanie, and hold up firmly for me. And that tells me I've got a clear circuit there. Now Stephanie puts the bread in her mouth, and I ask her to hold up, and we'll make another test. This time there's a complete collapse. Now I'll just show you this again with just two fingers, the lightest pressure you can see. Stephanie, hold up very hard against me, and you can see that there's absolutely no strength in that arm. Now what this tells us is that Stephanie has a hidden allergy to bread. Now I don't know of any other system that would show up or throw this piece of information out of the body's computers. So this is very valuable. We got just a very slightly shaky effect when we tested the muscle in the clear with the bread. When we tested for quantity overload, there was no change. But when I challenged the body here and turned the sensitivity up even more, we revealed a hidden allergy. And this, in fact, is how we found the problem for many people, including Nicole. And I think it's very important for us to realize that muscle testing for food sensitivities is a very personal matter, and it's not something that should be undertaken lightly. So I would urge you to use muscle testing for food sensitivities only on people who give you their full permission, and with people who ask you to do it for them. And I think it's a wrong use of it to use it as a party trick or to coerce people into doing it. So now what I'd like to do is use a muscle test to check Maeve for cheese sensitivity. I believe that's what you asked me if I'd do for you.
Yes, please.
Okay, sure. So Maeve, the first thing we'll do is to take the pectoralis major, and remember that it goes in this direction like this. The test, you're starting at right angles to the body, and I'm going to be pressing firmly against your wrist. So push firmly up against me briefly, please, keeping breathing, and off. How did that feel for you?
That was fine.
Okay, good. Now I'm just going to take a small piece of cheese and put it between your lips, like that, and ask you please to hold up again firmly. So push up firmly. Okay, how did that feel?
Okay.
Okay, good. I'm now going to put my fingers under your ear. I'll just show that to the viewers. Just there, under there. So come back center for me. Okay. Hold up firmly again, please. Hold up firmly. Okay. Now, how did that feel to you?
You sure you weren't pressing harder?
Is that how it seemed to you?
Possibility.
Not quite sure. Okay. Put the cheese back again, and let's test you in the clear. Push up firmly. How does that feel?
Okay.
Register how it feels on the wrist. Okay? Now I'm going to do my best to put the same amount of pressure on. Hold up firmly. Okay. How did that feel to you now?
It was different.
Okay. So you really felt there was a change?
Yes.
Okay. Pop it back in again. And push up firmly. Okay. Now I'm going to test it for the hidden allergy. And come back to center and push up for me. Push up hard. And good. So that stayed strong. Thank you very much, Maeve. Put that back on the plate. Now, what that reveals to us is that it probably isn't a good idea for Maeve to eat too much cheese. It's all right for her to eat it, but not too much of it. So, Maeve, I'd like to ask you, how do you feel about that?
Well, I was pretty certain that I did have an allergy to the cheese, because I find if I'd been on a binge, I came out in spots. If I left the cheese off for considerable time, no spots at all.
So you were quite surprised initially when you tested strong?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, very.
And isn't it interesting that you've got confirmation about the way you actually feel about eating cheese, that the muscle testing tells us that too much is not good for you?
Yes, I think I should stay off it.
Well, maybe enjoy it occasionally.
At a party.
And what I'd like to do now is to check Stephanie for sensitivity to cheese, much in the same way as I did with Maeve. Okay, hold up with your pectoralis major for me. Push up firmly. Did that feel good and strong? Okay. Now hold up. How did that feel?
Fine.
Good. And with the quantity test?
Good.
And with the hidden allergy test? Fine. And each time, of course, I'm pressing slowly and gently, and just for a short period of time, and we're both breathing, and we're getting that result. Okay, let's have the cheese out now. Fine. I'd like to introduce you to a second muscle test that you can use just in case the pectoralis major circuit isn't working as well as it might in somebody that you wanted to test. On this occasion, we're going to test a muscle that's in the back of the shoulder here, and the way we test it is to straighten the arm, keeping the elbow straight. The palm is turned out, and I'm putting two fingers in on Stephanie's wrist, and the action is to brace here and to pull the arm away from her body. So if I ask her to hold in tight now, Stephanie, I'm going to press slowly, gently, briefly, and breathe and off. And how did that feel?
Strong.
Okay, let's see what that muscle says to cheese in your case. Hold in tight for me, and hold, and and one, hold firmly. Okay, so there was a very distinct change there with cheese, which you didn't feel with the test for the pectoralis. Okay, fine. Thank you very much. I think that's very interesting. Because what that illustrates is biochemic individuality. Now, that's quite a mouthful, but what it means is that we're all different. That everybody's reactions to food is individual and specific. And we saw that Maeve was affected by quantities of cheese, as indicated by the pectoralis. And yet when we checked Stephanie's arm, nothing showed up as far as a hidden allergy or a quantity allergy, or that she should keep away from cheese as far as her stomach circuit was concerned. However, when we checked her pancreas circuit here by making this test with the latissimus dorsi, we found that there was a muscle change. Now, what does this mean? Well, this means that while Stephanie's stomach and her digestive processes can handle cheese, it does have an adverse effect on her pancreatic digestion. And whilst this is nothing to worry about, it's certainly an indication that she may want to avoid eating too much cheese. I'd like to introduce you to Mrs. Toner and Matthew. Thanks for coming along, Mrs. Toner.
My pleasure.
When did Matthew's problems start?
At birth, really, but they were more noticeable when he started school, and he had a very big lack of concentration. He also seemed to suffer with sinus trouble, so he was sent to the hospital, and they decided he needed his adenoids removed as he seemed to have difficulty hearing. So they took his adenoids out and washed his sinuses, but the effects were nil. His hearing was still bad. So we went back to the hospital, and they decided that they would take his tonsils out, partly because he was very undersized and very underweight, and the doctor there seemed to feel that there must be some sort of infection lurking, and that was stopping him growing. So I refused to have his tonsils taken out because I didn't see the point of having things chopped off him for no reason, and went back to my GP, and he did further blood tests because Matthew's teacher found that he was very lethargic, and he discovered that he had eosinophilia, which is too many eosinophils in the blood, and that proves that he had an allergy problem. I took him back to the hospital and they did scratch tests, but he didn't show up positive against any of them. But the lady who did the test seemed to feel that he had dust mite allergy because that was the most common, although he hadn't had any allergic reaction to that. And so I refused to do the things she said because I didn't see the point if he hadn't come up allergic to them. So we went back to the ENT doctor, who then persuaded me to have Matthew's tonsils removed. He had that done, and it had no effect whatsoever. And it just went from bad to worse until he had a bad bout of flu, where he just seemed to go downhill all the way.
He even had grommets in his ears, I believe.
He had grommets in his ears because the doctors said that his eardrums are very sensitive and soft, and they were absorbing any muck that he'd had in his ear from infections, and they were worried that his hearing was going to be permanently damaged. But my GP explained that because of the eosinophilia, the allergy was causing the hearing problem, and so they could test him 1 minute and he would be okay, and the next minute they could test him and the hearing could be down as much as 40%. And so really the grommets did no good whatsoever.
This must have all been incredibly distressing for you. And what effect did it have on Matthew?
He's very withdrawn, and he got to the stage where he didn't like going to the doctors for anything. And his work at school is very bad. He was sent to a remedial teacher for all subjects. The headmaster took him for mathematics. They tried punishment, they tried encouragement, they tried everything they could think of, and had got to the stage where they'd virtually washed their hands of him because they couldn't make him work whatever they did.
So tell me, you came across kinesiology, then what happened?
Matthew had a bad bout of flu, and the GP could do nothing for him. Everything she suggested we did, and he just seemed to get worse. And a friend who had been to see you recommended I brought him to you to try and sort out his allergies, and that's what we did.
With what results?
Amazing results. Within 10 minutes of being to see you, he was running around, playing and eating, and all things he hadn't done for at least 2 weeks.
How is he getting on at school now?
He's getting on a lot better. Before, he couldn't sit on a chair for longer than 5 minutes, and he couldn't concentrate, and as I say, he was with a remedial teacher. Now he is sitting on a chair all day. He no longer sucks his fingers or permanently clears his throat, and his headmaster came up and actually apologised to me for having been on Matthew's back for the last 2 years, and he now realises it wasn't Matthew's fault at all.
Wow. Matthew, I'd like to take this opportunity to check you for bread once again, because as we found when we tested you before, that it made your muscles change. Can we do that now?
Okay.
So I'm going to test you in the clear like we always do. Push up firmly. Good and strong. Now test this one for me. Turn it in. That's right. Holding tight. Good. How did that feel?
It felt fine.
Okay, great. So would you just put that between your lips for me? Great. Push up again now. Just the same, Matthew. Whoops. There it goes. And holding tight. Thank you very much. Matthew, tell me, since you've not been eating wheat, what difference has it made to you?
It's made a lot of difference.
Really?
Yes.
In what way?
I've been feeling fine. I've had more energy.
Good.
And lots of things.
Lovely. And happier?
Yes.
In a study done at London's Charing Cross Hospital's allergy clinic, the results that came up were as follows. People were affected by wheat 78%, oranges 65%, eggs 45%, tea and coffee 40%, chocolate 37%, milk 37%, beef 35%, corn 33%, cane sugar 33%, yeast 33%, mushrooms 30%, and peas 28%. Note that these are not exotic or way out foods. These are the staple things that form the basis of everybody's normal diet. One thing this certainly does show is that we're best advised to rotate the food that we eat, not eat the same thing every day. In this way we can often avoid having reactions to foods that might otherwise affect us badly. This is a typical selection of food which many people eat every day and probably don't realize they're getting allergic reactions to the wheat or to the sugar or to the salt or to the chocolate that's in them. And some people feel quite disturbed when they are asked to perhaps eat a little less of them or suggested to them that they might eradicate them from their diet. Confronted with the need to make sweeping dietary changes, some people feel quite uncomfortable and say, well, what on earth can I eat? So what we've done is we've assembled some of the wide range of foods that's available from which can be made different selections to provide an endless series of different dishes. So we've got vegetables in season, we've got beans and grains, spices, pulses, and poultry, fish and eggs, and for an occasional treat, some fruit. And it's from all these foods that we really can provide an endless supply of different dishes each day, free of allergic reactions. This is Anne Bousfield, a chartered physiotherapist. Tell me, Anne, how long had you been unwell?
For about 20 years.
Now, what foods did you react to when you first found out you had allergic reactions?
Well, I discovered myself that I was allergic to milk and milk products, and I gave those up in my diet. And then 12 years ago, I became much better, and then 12 years ago, the whole thing snowballed, and I was diagnosed as having total allergy syndrome.
What was your reaction when you first heard about kinesiology?
I'm afraid I was just too ill to be bothered.
Well, what symptoms did you have?
I was terribly lethargic. I was a vegetable really in bed. My muscles just ached and my legs were swollen, and I just couldn't take anything in. I had to be fed. All my food had to be minced up. I was in a terrible state.
What treatments did you try?
I tried several detoxifying treatments, which I did over several years, which helped me quite a lot. I also initially had a lot of vitamins and minerals which I had to have in pure powder form, which I had to measure out myself from little samples that the chemist made up for me. And gradually I got some foods back.
Then what happened?
Then I heard about kinesiology again. That was about 2 years ago. And I decided to go on a course and learn.
And what happened then?
Well, everything took off from then. I did more courses. As I was learning, I taught my mother to do it so that she could treat me, and I was treating her.
and it's just totally changed my life.
It seems like you're a different person.
I am a different person. In fact, in April I went on a week's residential course, and I was just able to eat all the food. I was even going up for seconds. Nobody could believe it.
As a physiotherapist, how do you see kinesiology as a professional tool?
I think it's absolutely essential, because it's no good treating somebody's back for back pain if they're reacting to a food such as wheat, which people do. And it's no good bashing away treating them, because they aren't going to respond to your treatment, and this very often does happen.
They don't respond because?
Because the food is turning off the muscles, and so the major stabilizing muscles of the back are just completely switched off.
So you're able to incorporate kinesiology with your professional work as a physiotherapist?
Oh yes, it's very important.
Kinesiology can be a lifesaver. To those suffering a miserable existence, kinesiology can be used to identify the problem areas in their diet. You may also want to do something for yourself to help your own allergic reactions. First thing I'd suggest you do is eliminate foods from your diet that make your muscles weak. Also, have a look at how much sugar and manufactured foods you are actually consuming and reduce them. Concentrate instead on vegetables, fish and poultry. Another thing you might find will be helpful is to use some vitamin and mineral supplementation. Some people think you should get enough in your diet. That may be true for somebody who's healthy, but for somebody who's suffering allergic reactions, clinical experience over 12 years shows me that that is not so. Be sure to look at your life's stressors, particularly those in the mental and emotional area, and do everything you can to reduce them. Give yourself plenty of rest. Drink plenty of water. Get some gentle exercise every day. And, a rather delicate topic, but make sure you move your bowels every day too. It's very important. Now, I hope you're not having any difficulty using the muscle testing procedures that I've shown you. But if you are and you'd like some professional help, the Association of Systematic Kinesiology maintains a list of practitioners who use muscle testing. And we'll give you the address you can write to later on. Regular preventive maintenance visits to someone trained to balance the body and check specific dietary needs really pays off, instead of waiting until you really need treatment. Kinesiology finds minor imbalances long before troublesome symptoms appear. Anyone who owns a car knows that preventive maintenance, although quite expensive and sometimes inconvenient, nevertheless pays in the long run. It is no fun and very costly to have to replace an engine because one neglected to change the oil when it was due. With no symptoms, we might think we do not need help. It's simpler to balance somebody who's healthy, though. It only takes a few minutes, and it's not a treatment, it's preventive care. Minor imbalances, if left uncorrected, accumulate and eventually cause health problems. A whole series of muscles are tested. Those found to test spongy are strengthened with touch or fingertip massage, and these stimuluses rebalance the circuit. When rebalanced, they test strong. This tunes the body and everything runs better, just like a car that's been serviced. People balanced regularly rarely get everything going around like colds and flu. That's because it strengthens the immune system, and their general level of health and well-being steadily improves as time goes on. There are many applications of kinesiology other than food testing. Fears and phobias of things like spiders, flying, claustrophobia, fear of heights can often be solved in minutes. All manner of structural problems, too, may be relieved using the muscle testing and balancing techniques. I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Potter. Mr. Potter, what was your problem?
Well, I had a neck ache and back ache, which I've had for quite a number of years, and it was recently aggravated by the fact that I fell off a motorcycle at some speed, and I figured that I'd better get something done about it before I went away on holiday. And so I came to see you on advice from others, and I've been quite amazed at what you've done so far.
So what happened when you were treated?
Well, basically, if you remember, I shook hands with you, and my hand was very painful, and you fixed it. I thought it was something I'd have to live with for a little while because I considered it to be severe bruising, but you'd fixed that before I'd even realised what you'd done. And after that you got to work on my neck and my back, and it was interesting as you was explaining about electrical impulses and what have you, and you started to work on me, massaging and so far and so forth, and after a little while I was sort of sitting up and moving, which I didn't think I'd be able to do for a little while, and I was quite amazed that you'd done it basically in a short space of time, and I thought that it was something I'd have to live with for quite a few weeks. So that was it. I was quite pleased with your efforts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Butler. It's really wonderful to see Eric again, because as a chartered physiotherapist he was in my classes and sometimes caused quite a riot. Tell me, what impresses you about kinesiology?
Well, it's the speed of recovery. It's wonderful to see somebody hobble in and after a short while walk out almost normally, and it's a lot of fun. I do realise that for 20 years I've been doing it all wrong. It's as simple as that.
These muscle tests can safely be used by anyone. If you learn to do them yourself, you don't have to rely on professionals every time you want to make a test. Kinesiology can be learned by anyone. Obviously, the more training you have, the more accurate you'll become. Hopefully, this video will get you started using it for yourselves. Most people can learn enough about food sensitivity testing in one weekend to do some useful work among their family and friends.
Claire, when did you first hear about kinesiology?
It was in 1976 when my father came back from the States to teach Touch for Health in this country and in Europe.
And that was 12 years ago, so what re-sparked your interest in it?
I helped him out in the clinic a few times, and I saw people come in great pain and 20 minutes later after their treatment leave feeling absolutely wonderful. So I decided to go along to one of his weekend courses to see for myself.
Great. And, what could you learn of value in just one weekend?
Well, to my amazement, a lot. I went straight back and worked with a friend of mine who'd been taking drugs and was having flashbacks and nightmares. And just after one balance, she just felt so different.
And then what happened?
Well, I've worked with her several times, and she feels very different.
And you did that after the first weekend?
Yes, just after one. I've taken several since, and then went on to take the instructor training workshop, which lasts for a week. And now I can teach my own classes, and I've got one coming up soon that I'll be doing with a friend of mine who's also an instructor.
Lovely. Claire, you're going to have a baby. How has kinesiology helped you in your pregnancy?
It's helped a lot. I suffered with morning sickness to begin with, and one thing that really helped was finding out that I was sensitive to onions quite badly. Mm-hmm. And when we find that out and I stopped eating onions, the sickness did reduce, although it didn't go completely. And now in the later stages I suffer from backache, and regular balancing really helps to curb the pain.
You may decide you'd like to learn more about kinesiology, and there's probably an instructor near your home. In a basic weekend, you can learn a lot more about food sensitivity testing, and you can also learn how to strengthen and balance muscles as well. There's plenty of time in the classes for hands-on experience under expert supervision. Then you can go home and use these techniques on your family and friends and gain great satisfaction. And I'm going to ask Steph, what sort of people take our classes?
A whole variety of people, really. Taxi drivers, businessmen, mothers, secretaries, a lot of people who know absolutely nothing about healthcare.
And some who do.
Sure, acupuncturists, osteopaths, physiotherapists, just like Eric, who loved and was amazed by what he could learn in one weekend. We even had an orthopedic surgeon of 83 who took all the classes.
I remember him well. You know, there's an old Chinese proverb which says, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach him how to fish, you feed him for life. And that's one of the most rewarding things about sharing these tools about kinesiology with other people. This relatively new science, only discovered in 1964, is being recognized as an essential part of the future of healthcare. It is destined to become the #1 tool, not only to discover allergies, but also to be able to discover subclinical conditions long before they develop into health problems. Prevention is the key. Kinesiology is now playing a very important part in helping people to adjust to an ever-deteriorating environment. The word doctor means teacher, and the role of the natural holistic health practitioner is to encourage people to take more responsibility for their own lives and to help them to make the necessary changes in their lifestyle. Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb, said in 1890, "The doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will interest his patients in the care of the human frame, in diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease." Hopefully the light will soon dawn on his prophecy of the way to gain and maintain health.